A young black girl walks into a heated argument between her father and a police officer, only to be inhumanely treated by the cop, who feels untouchable with the power of his badge. This gripping story exposes the harsh realities of abuse of power and the fight for justice. Tune in to see how this emotional encounter begins, and how it ends. Subscribe now to keep enjoying the content. The sun had dipped low in the sky, casting a warm, golden glow on the quiet street where a young girl named Tiana played. She was a bright spot of energy in her favorite blue dress, the fabric fluttering around her bare legs as she skipped and danced. Her dark eyes sparkled with joy, her laughter a sweet melody that filled the air. At just 7 years old, Tiana was a beacon of happiness and curiosity, her pigtails bouncing as she chased after a stray soccer ball that had rolled away from a nearby game. She had a heart full of love for everyone she met, not knowing the ugliness that could dwell in some. Officer Jenkins was a stark contrast to Tiana's innocence. He was a burly, white man with a sneer that seemed to be permanently etched into his face. His uniform was crumpled and his badge tarnished, reflecting the prejudices he harbored within. He had a history of racial bias that he wore like a badge of pride, believing that his badge granted him the power to act on his deep-seated anger and resentment. His partner had often warned him about his behavior, but he brushed it off, claiming it was just good policing. As Tiana played in the yard, her laughter filled the air, but it was abruptly interrupted when a patrol car screeched to a halt nearby. Officer Jenkins stepped out, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the family dog. Without a moment's hesitation, he approached and kicked the dog with the sole of his boot. "Hey! What are you doing?" Tiana's father shouted, rushing forward as the dog yelped and cowered, tail tucked between its legs. The officer turned, his expression cold. "Mind your business, buddy. This mutt needs to learn some respect." "Respect? You just kicked him for no reason," Tiana's father exclaimed, anger rising in his voice. "What's wrong with you?" Tiana, sensing the tension, tugged at her father's shirt. "Daddy, what is going on? Are you in trouble?" Her father knelt down to her level, trying to keep his voice steady. "Sorry, baby. This cop just kicked our dog, and I'm so angry right now. He thinks he's above the law." Officer Jenkins interrupted, his tone dripping with disdain. "I have the power under this badge to do as I will. I suggest you know your place. Stop arguing with me and leave, or else I will arrest you, your daughter, and shoot that stupid dog." "What's the meaning of this?" Tiana's father demanded, his voice firm but not yet raised in anger. The officer's gaze shifted to Tiana, and a cruel smirk crossed his face. "Look at this little girl. She thinks she can just stand there while her dad makes a fool of himself." Without warning, he lunged forward, scooping Tiana up in one swift motion. "Let's see how tough you are now," he sneered, tossing her into a nearby dirty wheelie bin. "Daddy, help me!" Tiana screamed, her voice muffled as the metal clanked around her. "Get your hands off her," her father yelled, panic flooding his voice as he rushed toward the bin. "You can't do this. She's just a child." Subscribe now to keep enjoying the content. But the lid slammed shut, plunging Tiana into darkness, her terrified screams echoing in the confined space. Outside, her father pounded on the bin, desperation in his eyes. "Please. Let her out. You're making a mistake." The girl's father was frozen in shock, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. "What the hell are you doing?" he roared, his fear for his daughter overpowering his own fear of the law. But Officer Jenkins just smirked, his eyes cold and hateful. "Teaching you a lesson," he spat. "You think you can just let your kind run wild around here?" The sound of the bin's lid slamming shut echoed through the neighborhood, silencing the laughter and shouts from the nearby park. The soccer game came to a halt as the players watched in horror. The cop's hand hovered over his gun, daring anyone to approach. Tiana's father, knowing the futility of confrontation, took a step back, his eyes never leaving his daughter's trapped form. As the moments ticked by, the air grew thick with tension. The crowd surrounding Officer Jenkins swelled, their expressions a mix of anger and concern. A woman stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Let her out of there." "Yeah. You've got no right to treat that little girl like this," another voice chimed in from the back. Officer Jenkins sneered, taking a step closer to the bin. "Back off, all of you. This is none of your business." His tone was menacing, as if daring anyone to challenge him. The woman, undeterred, pressed on. "You can't just throw a child in a trash bin. She's scared. You need to let her out. Keep off and stop interfering with my work." Jenkins barked, his eyes narrowing as he glared at her. "I'm handling this." "Handling it," she shot back, her voice rising in indignation. "You're abusing your power. This isn't right." "Ma'am, I suggest you step aside before you get yourself into trouble," he warned, his hand hovering near his holster. Feeling the weight of the crowd's eyes on her, the woman took a deep breath and stepped back, her heart racing. "I'm reporting this. You'll be held accountable for your actions." "Go ahead. I'm sure your little complaint will change anything," Jenkins scoffed, rolling his eyes dismissively. "Just wait. I'll make sure the supervisor hears about this," she declared, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. She turned to the crowd, raising her voice to rally them. "Everyone, we need to call for help. We can't let this go on." A man in the crowd nodded, pulling out his phone. "I'll call the police station. They need to know what's happening here." "Good idea," another person shouted. "We need to make sure someone in charge comes down here." Subscribe now to keep enjoying the content. As the woman stepped aside to allow the man to make the call, she glanced back at Jenkins, her eyes filled with determination. "You can't silence us. We're not going anywhere until that girl is safe." Jenkins crossed his arms, a smug expression on his face. "You think you can just stand there and shout? You're wasting your time." But the crowd was growing restless, their anger palpable. "We won't let you intimidate us," someone yelled, and the murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. "Just wait until the supervisor arrives," the woman said, her voice resolute. "You'll see that you can't get away with this." Officer Jenkins shifted uncomfortably, the weight of the crowd's scrutiny beginning to affect him. But he quickly masked it with bravado. "I'm not afraid of any supervisor. I know what I'm doing." "Then let's see how you explain this," the woman retorted, gesturing toward the bin. "You're about to have a lot of questions to answer." The tension hung thick in the air as they awaited the arrival of the supervisor, the crowd united in their determination to stand against injustice. Tiana was not alone in her fear. Inside the bin, the darkness felt suffocating, and she could hear the thud of her own heart racing in her chest. The smell of rotting garbage was overpowering, making her stomach churn. She felt something slimy and wet seep into her shoes, and panic surged within her. "Help! Daddy, please," she screamed, pounding on the metal with her small fists. Her voice was hoarse from fear, but she clung to the hope that someone would hear her and save her from this nightmare. "Daddy! I'm scared." The weight of her father's words, "Be strong and take courage," resonated within her, a beacon of hope in the midst of this harrowing ordeal. "I will try to get you out. Just hold on." Her father's voice, laced with anguish, only amplified the gravity of their situation. As the scene grew more tense, a crowd began to gather. People whispered among themselves, their eyes darting nervously toward Officer Jenkins. The cop's gaze shifted, searching for the source of the recording device he was sure he had heard. He tightened his grip around the handle of his gun, his knuckles turning white. "Back off, everyone. This is none of your business," he barked, trying to assert his authority. But the crowd didn't back down. They were fueled by anger and fear, their murmurs growing louder. "What kind of cop does this?" one person shouted. "This isn't right." Then, as if the universe had finally had enough of his cruelty, a group of teenagers sprinted toward him. "Look! It's that cop," one of them yelled, pointing. "Let's show him he can't get away with this." Subscribe now to keep enjoying the content. They moved with a sense of urgency, like a well-rehearsed team. One of them darted into a nearby alleyway and snatched up an empty trash bin, the lid clanging against the sides as they swiftly positioned themselves. "Hey! What do you think you're doing?" Officer Jenkins shouted, his voice cutting through the air. His eyes locked onto the figure with the bin, but it was already too late. Before he could even take a step forward, they lunged at him. The trash bin came down hard over his head, its cold plastic sides scraping against his skin as they trapped his hands inside. "What the?" Jenkins grunted, his words muffled by the thick plastic. Panic rose in his chest as his vision was blocked, the world reduced to a dark, confined space. His hands were stuck, unable to move, the bin's weight pressing down on his head and trapping his limbs to his body. It was a sensation of helplessness he had never known before. His heart pounded in his chest, and his breath quickened. The echo of the plastic reverberated in his ears, a constant reminder of his immobilized state. He thrashed inside the bin, but it was no use. "Whoever did this is gonna regret it," he threatened, his voice muffled and full of anger. "I swear, when I get out of here, I'll make sure you rot in jail." Officer Jenkins struggled again, his body twisting as he tried to free himself. His mind raced, thoughts of retribution and justice swirling, but he was utterly trapped. The simple act of trying to fight back only amplified the feeling of being powerless. For what felt like an eternity, Tiana remained trapped in the stifling darkness, her heart hammering in her chest. She heard muffled shouts and the scuffle of feet, but she couldn't make out the words. Tears streamed down her face as she cried out for her father again. "Daddy. I am so scared, please get me out." The supervisor arrived on the scene, her stern expression and crisp uniform signaling her authority. The crackle of her radio added a sense of urgency to the tense atmosphere. Without hesitation, she assessed the situation, her sharp eyes taking in the chaos. She swiftly moved to free the young girl from the trash bin, her hands pulling the heavy plastic away with precision. Then, with a grunt, she yanked the bin off Officer Jenkins' upper body, her disbelief etched across her face. "Jenkins, what the hell is going on here?" she bellowed, her voice sharp, slicing through the chaotic noise around them. Officer Jenkins scrambled to his feet, his face flushing red with a mix of rage and humiliation. He tried to explain, his words spilling out in a jumble. "It's not what it looks like. I was trying to—" her father, the dog was. His voice faltered as the supervisor's cold gaze pinned him in place. She didn't let him finish. "You better have a damn good explanation for this," she cut him off, her tone unforgiving. "Because what I'm seeing right now isn't a mistake, it's a mess. You know better than this." Subscribe now to keep enjoying the content. Jenkins clenched his fists, his breath coming out in quick, shallow gasps, but he didn't respond. The supervisor's gaze then shifted to Tiana, who stood with her father, clinging to him tightly, her wide eyes full of fear. The sight of the girl trembling in her father's arms only made the supervisor's jaw tighten further. "I'll talk to you later," the supervisor said to Tiana gently, her voice a soft contrast to her earlier sharpness. "Everything will be okay, I promise. Just hang tight." She turned back to Jenkins with a look of stern resolve. "You're suspended, Jenkins. Effective immediately. We'll be investigating this, and I want your full cooperation. Don't think for a second you're getting away with this." Officer Jenkins opened his mouth, but she raised a hand, cutting him off before he could speak. "Save it. You've said enough for today." The fallout from the incident was swift. Officer Jenkins was placed on suspension, and an internal investigation was launched. But the video of the assault on Tiana quickly went viral, sparking heated debates, protests, and calls for accountability. The public outcry was impossible to ignore. Tiana had endured a trauma no child should ever experience. Every time she spotted a police car, her heart raced, and she could almost feel the suffocating weight of the bin surrounding her again. The trust she had once had in those meant to protect her had been broken, replaced by a lingering fear of authority. But amidst the outrage and the solidarity, there were whispers of doubt. Some said that the girl's father had provoked the cop, that he'd been aggressive, that the situation was more complicated than it seemed. Yet, the video evidence was clear, a racist act of cruelty, a child traumatized, a community in shock. The supervisor's investigation was thorough, leaving no stone unturned. She listened to Tiana's trembling account, her father's firm recollections, and the testimonies of the teens who had stepped in. Officer Jenkins' history of racial bias was laid bare, his past misconduct cases coming to light. The supervisor knew she had to act swiftly and decisively. Days turned into weeks, and the community held its breath, waiting for the outcome. Would the system protect its own, or would justice prevail? The tension was palpable as the decision was made. The racist cop was fired, his badge stripped from his waist, his gun taken away. The supervisor looked him in the eye and told him he was no longer welcome in the force. The news spread like wildfire. The neighborhood erupted in cheers and tears. For Tiana and her family, it was a small victory in a long battle. The little girl knew that she'd never forget the smell of the bin, the feeling of being trapped, the weight of fear pressing down on her chest. But she also knew that she had been heard, that she had not been forgotten. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to help our channel grow.